The basement smelled like sawdust and disappointment. 2 in the morning, and I was down here fixing a lamp that didn't need fixing, listening to my wife's phone buzz against the wooden stairs like an angry wasp. Porter Keller, 45 years old, IT contractor, marriage counselor to broken electronics. The phone lit up again. Troy S. Another message at midnight. If I'd known marriage meant sharing my wife with her boss, I'd have asked for a signing bonus. I climbed the creaky stairs, holding the lamp cord like evidence. Evelyn was asleep, or pretending to be, her auburn hair spread across the pillow in that careful way that meant she'd been awake 5 minutes ago. Her phone sat on the nightstand, screen down. Always screen down these days. "Ev?" I whispered. She stirred, made that little noise she'd perfected over 15 years of marriage. The one that said she was too tired for conversation, but alert enough to deflect questions. "Your phone was buzzing," I said. "Work stuff." Her voice carried that edge it got when I asked the wrong questions. "Troy's in crisis mode about the Henderson account." Troy Sennett, her boss at Meridian Advertising, the kind of guy who wore expensive suits to hide cheap character. I'd met him twice at company parties, watched him work the room like a politician, all handshakes and hollow charm. "At midnight?" She rolled over, finally looking at me. Even exhausted, Evelyn was striking. Sharp cheekbones, green eyes that could cut glass when she was annoyed, which was most of the time lately. "You sound insecure, Porter." There it was, the word she'd been using like a scalpel for months. Insecure. Delivered not as an observation, but as a diagnosis, a character flaw that explained away every reasonable question. "Maybe I am," I said. She softened, reached for my hand. "I'm not your property. I have a career, responsibilities. The Henderson account is worth $2 million. I nodded, set the lamp on my dresser. "You're right, sorry." But I wasn't sorry. I was calculating. The next morning, Evelyn left early for another crisis meeting. I watched from the kitchen window as she backed her silver Lexus out of our driveway, phone already pressed to her ear. Probably Troy, discussing strategies that had nothing to do with advertising. I made coffee and opened my laptop. 23 years in IT had taught me that patterns don't lie. People do, but data doesn't. Evelyn's location sharing was still active from when she'd lost her phone at the mall last year. I pulled up the Find My app, traced her movements from the past month. Home to office, office to lunch spots to places that weren't the office. Troy's condo on Elm Street appeared 14 times in the past 3 weeks, always between 9 and 11 p.m., always on nights when Evelyn claimed to be working late. I closed the laptop and went to the basement, not to fix anything this time, but to think. The basement was my kingdom, workbench, tools, boxes of old electronics that might be useful someday. Evelyn never came down here, said it smelled like motor oil and broken dreams. She wasn't wrong. I found the folder where I kept our financial records, credit card statements, receipts, the paper trail of a marriage slowly coming apart. Dinner at Romano's on March 15th, $87. Evelyn had told me she was at a client dinner that night. The receipt showed 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, 1 dessert shared. March 22nd, another dinner. April 3rd, flowers from petals and stems. Evelyn was allergic to most flowers. The arrangement never made it home. My phone rang. Benny Morrison, my oldest friend and the owner of the Loon's Nest, the bar where honest men went to become cynical. "Porter, you sound terrible," he said. "Thanks for the pep talk. Come by tonight. First beer's on me, second one's on your tab, third one we'll discuss your wife." Benny had been a cop for 20 years before buying the bar. He had a talent for reading people and a gift for asking uncomfortable questions. Also, he'd been divorced twice, which made him either an expert or a cautionary tale. I spent the afternoon reviewing Evelyn's work laptop. She'd left it at home, plugged in on the kitchen counter, like a confession waiting to happen. Her password was our anniversary date, October 12th. Either she trusted me completely, or she'd forgotten I knew it. Her email was mostly legitimate business, but there was a folder labeled Expense Reports 2023. Inside, I found messages from Troy that started professional and gradually became personal. Nothing explicit, but the tone shifted from regarding the Henderson proposal to looking forward to our discussion tonight to you looked beautiful at the presentation. I heard Evelyn's car in the driveway and closed the laptop. She came through the front door carrying takeout bags and wearing the smile she used when she felt guilty about something. Thai food, she announced. From that place you like. We ate in relative silence, her phone face down beside her plate, mine buzzing with work emails I ignored. She talked about her day, meetings, deadlines, the usual corporate theater. I listened and nodded and waited. Troy thinks I should apply for the senior account director position, she said, picking at her pad tie. That's a big promotion. It would mean more travel, longer hours, more responsibility. More time with Troy, I thought, but didn't say. After dinner, she retreated to the living room with a glass of wine and her laptop. I loaded the dishwasher and tried to remember when we'd stopped talking about anything that mattered. When had we become roommates instead of partners? At 10:30, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then at me. I need to take this, she said. Work emergency. She walked into the bedroom and closed the door. I could hear her voice through the thin walls, but not the words. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. When she came back out, she was already in her pajamas. Everything okay? I asked. Troy's having issues with the Henderson presentation. I might need to go in early tomorrow to help him fix it. I nodded. Sounds stressful. It is. She kissed my cheek, a perfunctory gesture that felt like a period at the end of a sentence. I'm exhausted, going to bed. I stayed up another hour, sitting in the basement with my laptop, mapping the geography of my wife's deception. The Find My app showed she'd been at Troy's condo until 9:15 tonight. She'd come home at 9:30, just enough time to pick up dinner and construct a story about work emergencies. The next morning, I installed a dashcam in Evelyn's car while she was in the shower. A small device, barely visible behind the rearview mirror. Insurance purposes, I'd tell her if she asked. Lots of crazy drivers these days. She didn't ask. I followed her routine from my home office, watching the Find My app like a stock ticker. Office at 8:30, lunch at Romano's at noon, back to the office at 1:15. Normal day, normal patterns. Until 5:45, when her location jumped to Troy's condo again. I drove to Elm Street and parked across from his building, a modern glass and steel monument to successful men who made poor choices. Evelyn's Lexus sat in the visitor parking, next to Troy's black BMW. I waited 2 hours. At 8 o'clock, they came out together. Troy held the door for her, his hand briefly touching the small of her back. She laughed at something he said, the sound carrying across the parking lot like a slap. They didn't kiss goodbye, but they stood close enough that they might as well have. I drove home and sat in my basement until midnight, surrounded by the tools and projects that had once given my life purpose. Now they felt like artifacts from someone else's existence. When Evelyn came home at 10:15, she had a story ready about client calls and strategy sessions. I listened and nodded and told her I understood, but I was done understanding. It was time to start documenting. The loon's nest smelled like honest sweat and spilled beer. Benny Morrison stood behind the bar, polishing glasses with the methodical precision of a man who'd learned patience the hard way. 3 stools down, Mrs. Lathrop from my street nursed a whiskey sour and held court with anyone willing to listen to her theories about the mayor's new girlfriend. You look like a man with problems, Benny said when I sat down. just the usual ones. He poured me a beer without asking what I wanted. 20-year friendship had its privileges. Evelyn still working late? I took a long drink before answering. Every night this week. Uh-huh. Benny had perfected the art of saying everything while saying nothing. You want advice, or you want to sit here and feel sorry for yourself? What's the advice? Follow the money. Follow the mileage. Follow the patterns. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. People think affairs are about emotion. They're not. They're about logistics, hotel receipts, gas stations, restaurant charges. Cheaters are creatures of habit. Mrs. Lathrop looked over, her radar detecting gossip from 3 stools away. Mind your own business, Helen, Benny said without looking at her. I pulled out my phone and showed him the Find My app. She's been at her boss's place 14 times in 3 weeks. Troy Sennett? Benny whistled low. That guy's got a reputation. Married to some ice queen with family money, board connections. You know him? He comes in here sometimes with his golf buddies, tips like a teenager, talks like he owns the world. The kind of guy who thinks rules apply to other people. I finished my beer and ordered another. The alcohol wasn't helping, but it wasn't hurting either. What are you going to do? Benny asked. I don't know yet. But I was lying. I knew exactly what I was going to do. The next morning, I reviewed the dashcam footage from Evelyn's car. She'd driven straight to Troy's condo after work, stayed for 2 hours, then stopped at Romano's for takeout before coming home. The passenger seat showed evidence of recent occupancy, adjusted position, different radio station. I made copies of everything. Bank statements, credit card records, location data, timestamps. Not for a lawyer. I wasn't ready for that nuclear option yet. But for leverage, when the time came. Evelyn was in the shower when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Troy. Can't wait for tonight. Same place? I memorized the message and put the phone back exactly where she'd left it. At breakfast, she announced another late night. The Henderson presentation is tomorrow, she said, buttering her toast with unnecessary concentration. Troy wants to run through it one more time. At his place? She looked up sharply. At the office. Why would you think otherwise? No reason, just curious about the process. She relaxed slightly. It's boring stuff. Numbers and charts and corporate nonsense. I nodded and drank my coffee and wondered how long she'd been practicing these lies. That afternoon, I drove to Meridian Advertising. The building was a sleek glass rectangle that screamed success and whispered desperation. I parked in the visitor lot and waited. At 5:30, employees began trickling out. I recognized Mara Devlin, Evelyn's friend and colleague, walking to her car with another woman I didn't know. They were deep in conversation, heads close together like conspirators. At 6:15, Evelyn emerged with Troy. They walked to his BMW, got in together, and drove toward downtown. Not toward his condo, not toward the office, toward the Riverside Hotel. I followed at a distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline. The hotel was expensive, discreet, the kind of place where married executives conducted business they couldn't conduct at home. They went inside together. I sat in the parking lot for 3 hours, watching other couples come and go, wondering when I'd become the kind of man who spied on his own wife. They emerged at 9:30, walking separately to Troy's car. The distance between them was calculated, professional, but I'd seen enough. I drove home and waited in the basement. Evelyn arrived at 10:15 with Chinese food and a story about working through dinner at the office. How did the presentation prep go? I asked. Good. Really good. Troy thinks we have a strong chance with Henderson. I nodded and ate my lo mein and listened to her elaborate on the fictional meeting. She was a good liar. Specific details, consistent timeline, appropriate level of enthusiasm. If I hadn't been tracking her location, I might have believed every word. After dinner, she went upstairs to take a bath. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at her laptop on the counter. The temptation was overwhelming, but I'd already seen enough. More evidence wouldn't change the fundamental equation. My wife was having an affair with her boss. They were using company time and company resources to conduct their relationship. Troy was married to someone with board connections, which meant he had more to lose than Evelyn did, which meant he was vulnerable. I went to the basement and opened a new folder on my computer. Project documentation, I labeled it. Inside, I began organizing everything I'd collected: dates, times, locations, financial records, a comprehensive timeline of deception. But I wasn't building a case for divorce court. I was building a weapon. The next morning, Evelyn left early for the Henderson presentation. I wished her luck and meant it. Whatever happened between us, I wanted her to succeed professionally. She'd worked hard for this opportunity. I spent the day researching Troy Sennett. LinkedIn profile, company bio, social media presence. Married to Catherine Sennett, daughter of a prominent local family. Board member at 3 different organizations. Golf handicap of 6. Drove a BMW, lived in a condo worth $500,000, and made enough money to think he was untouchable. But everyone had pressure points. I found Catherine Sennett's contact information through her charity work. She was involved with the Children's Hospital, the Art Museum, and a literacy foundation. Public-facing role, visible in the community. The kind of woman who valued reputation above almost everything else. At 4 o'clock, Evelyn called with good news. Meridian had won the Henderson account. $2 million in billing over the next 18 months. Troy was taking the team out to celebrate. "Don't wait up," she said. "This could go late." "Congratulations. You earned this." "Thanks, honey. I love you." The words hit like a physical blow. She might even mean them in whatever compartmentalized way people could love someone while betraying them. I hung up and opened my laptop. Time to stop gathering evidence and start using it. Troy's personal email address was listed on his company bio. I composed a message, then deleted it. Composed another, deleted that too. The approach had to be perfect, subtle enough to avoid immediate suspicion, direct enough to cause maximum damage. Instead, I decided to start with something simpler. I drove to Troy's condo and parked in the visitor lot. His BMW sat in its assigned space, pristine and arrogant. I walked over with a key from my workshop, not to steal anything, just to leave a small, precise scratch along the driver's side door. Nothing dramatic, nothing criminal, just a tiny imperfection in his perfect world. "Consider it performance art, Troy. Your car's as loyal as you are." I drove home and waited for Evelyn to return from her celebration dinner. She came in at midnight, slightly tipsy and genuinely happy about the Henderson win. We talked about her success, her future at the company, the opportunities this account would create. She fell asleep with her head on my shoulder, and for a moment I remembered why I'd fallen in love with her 15 years ago. Ambitious, brilliant, driven. Somewhere along the way, those qualities had become weapons turned against our marriage. But I was done being a victim. Tomorrow, I would start fighting back. Mara Devlin cornered me at the Loon's Nest on Thursday night, sliding onto the bar stool next to mine with the predatory grace of someone who lived for other people's drama. She was Evelyn's closest friend at Meridian, a woman who collected secrets like vintage wines and aged them until they were ready to serve. "Porter, honey," she said, signaling Benny for a martini. "You look tired." "Long week." "I bet. Evelyn's been working so hard lately. The Henderson account is consuming her life." Benny set down her drink and gave me a look that said he'd rather be anywhere else. Mara had that effect on people. "She's dedicated," I said. "Oh, absolutely. She and Troy make such a good team. He really brings out the best in her, you know, professionally speaking." The emphasis on professionally was subtle as a brick through a window. "They work well together," I agreed. Mara leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You're lucky to have such an ambitious wife." Some men would feel threatened by a woman who works closely with someone like Troy. He's so successful, so charming. But you're secure enough in yourself not to worry about that. There it was. The same gaslighting technique Evelyn used, wrapped in fake concern and delivered with a smile. Any objection I raised would be evidence of insecurity, jealousy, controlling behavior. You're right, I said. I should be grateful she's so driven. Mara smiled, satisfied that she'd delivered her message. Exactly. Trust is so important in marriage. I finished my beer and stood up. Say hi to Troy for me next time you see him. Her smile faltered for just a moment. Of course. I left her at the bar and drove home, my decision crystallizing with each mile. Enough games, enough hints and warnings and careful positioning. Time for direct action. At home, I opened Evelyn's laptop and navigated to her email. The password was still our anniversary date, which felt like either supreme confidence or casual cruelty. I scrolled through her recent messages with Troy, looking for the right ammunition. There, a message from 2 days ago. Can't wait for our meeting tonight. I have some ideas I'd like to explore with you privately. Troy's response. My place at 8. Come ready to work late. Innocent enough on the surface, but the subtext was clear to anyone paying attention, and Catherine Sennett struck me as someone who paid very close attention. I forwarded the entire email chain to Catherine's personal address. No commentary, no explanation, just the messages, with their timestamps and metadata intact. Then I forwarded the same chain to the Meridian Advertising Board of Directors. Their email addresses were listed on the company website, a monument to corporate transparency that was about to become Troy's worst nightmare. Finally, I sent the messages to Meridian's legal department and human resources. Workplace relationships weren't illegal, but they created liability issues, especially when one party supervised the other. I deleted the sent folder and closed the laptop. Outcomes would decide themselves now. The next morning, Evelyn left for work in her usual rush, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. She seemed normal, relaxed even. The Henderson win had given her confidence, made her feel untouchable. That confidence wouldn't last long. I spent the morning working on a client's network security upgrade, but my mind kept drifting to Meridian Advertising. Somewhere in that glass building, Troy Sennett was about to have the worst day of his professional life. At 11:30, my phone rang. Evelyn. Porter, something's happening at work. I can't talk long, but there's some kind of emergency board meeting. Troy's been called in. What kind of emergency? I don't know. HR won't say anything, but people are talking. Someone sent anonymous emails to the board about inappropriate workplace relationships. I made sympathetic noises while silently congratulating myself on the timing. That sounds serious. It is. The whole office is buzzing with rumors. I have to go. They're calling another meeting. She hung up, and I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. The first domino had fallen. The afternoon brought more calls from Evelyn. Troy had been suspended pending investigation. The board was conducting interviews with all senior staff. HR was reviewing personnel files and company policies. It's chaos here, she said during her third call. No one knows what's happening, but everyone's scared they're next. What kind of relationships are they investigating? Anything that violates the company ethics policy. Supervisors dating subordinates, conflicts of interest, misuse of company resources, the usual corporate paranoia. But it wasn't paranoia if the threats were real. That evening, Evelyn came home looking shell-shocked. She poured herself a large glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Bad day? I asked. The worst. Troy's been suspended indefinitely. They're reviewing all his accounts, all his personnel decisions. Someone's going to pay for this, and I'm afraid it might be me. Why would you be in trouble? She looked at me with those green eyes that had once promised everything and now held only calculation. Because I work closely with Troy. Because I've been on his accounts. Because in situations like this, Guilt by association is enough. I sat down across from her, reached for her hand. You haven't done anything wrong. Haven't I? The question hung between us like a confession waiting to be born. For a moment, I thought she might tell me the truth. Admit the affair, ask for forgiveness, give us a chance to rebuild something honest. Instead, she pulled her hand away and finished her wine. I need to be careful, she said. Distance myself from Troy until this blows over. Focus on my own accounts, my own reputation. That sounds smart. She nodded, already planning her survival strategy. I should probably work from home tomorrow, avoid the office drama until things settle down. But working from home meant I could monitor her calls, track her movements, watch her navigate the crisis I'd created. The irony was perfect. That night, as Evelyn slept beside me, I lay awake, thinking about consequences. I'd fired the first shot in a war I wasn't sure I could win. Troy Sennett had money, connections, and resources I couldn't match, but he also had vulnerabilities I was only beginning to explore. And I had something he didn't. Nothing left to lose. The next morning brought confirmation that my strategy was working. Benny called with gossip from his usual sources. Troy Sennett's in deep trouble, he said. Board meeting went nuclear yesterday. His wife was there, looking like she wanted to skin him alive. Word is, someone sent her explicit evidence of his extracurricular activities. Explicit how? Email chains, timeline documentation, financial records, professional-grade detective work. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. I made non-committal sounds while mentally reviewing my next moves. The emails had been just the opening salvo. Now I needed to escalate the pressure, force Troy and Evelyn into making mistakes that would complete their destruction. Any word on how this affects the other employees? I asked. Depends on how deep they were in Troy's business. Anyone who was covering for him, enabling him, or benefiting from his protection is probably sweating right now. Including my wife. I hung up and found Evelyn in the kitchen, laptop open, phone pressed to her ear. She was talking to someone about damage control, reputation management, strategic positioning. The conversation sounded rehearsed, like she'd been practicing her defense all night. When she hung up, I brought her coffee and asked how she was holding up. Better, she said. I talked to some people, got some perspective on the situation. This might actually be an opportunity for me. How so? With Troy gone, there's a power vacuum in senior management. If I handle this right, distance myself from his problems while maintaining my professional relationships, I could come out ahead. She was already rewriting history, positioning herself as an innocent victim of Troy's poor judgment. The speed of her reinvention was impressive and terrifying. But I wasn't done with either of them yet. Catherine Sennett looked exactly like the kind of woman who'd married Troy for strategic reasons rather than romantic ones. Ice blonde hair, designer clothes, and the sort of controlled fury that came from years of managing a public image while married to a private disappointment. I watched her from across the parking lot at Meridian Advertising, where she'd arrived in a silver Mercedes to collect her husband's personal effects. Troy wasn't with her, probably hiding at home, calling lawyers and trying to figure out how much this scandal would cost him. She emerged from the building 20 minutes later, carrying a single cardboard box. Everything that mattered to Troy Sennett's professional life, reduced to office supplies and a few framed photos. That evening, Evelyn came home with news that the investigation was expanding. They're reviewing all of Troy's accounts, she said, pouring herself wine with shaking hands. Looking for irregularities, policy violations, anything that could expose the company to liability. Find anything? Expense reports that don't match up. Client dinners that might have been personal meetings. Travel authorizations for conferences that never happened. She was describing her own activities without realizing it. The dinners at Romano's, the hotel meetings, the late-night strategy sessions that had nothing to do with advertising. What happens if they find violations? Depends on the severity. Reprimands, suspensions, terminations. In extreme cases, they might pursue legal action. I nodded sympathetically while calculating how much evidence I had of her complicity. Enough to destroy her career, certainly. Maybe enough to ruin her professionally forever. But I wanted more than professional consequences. I wanted total devastation. The next morning, I drove to Troy's condo. His BMW wasn't in the parking lot, probably in the shop getting the scratch repaired, or maybe he was hiding it from his wife's wrath. The building's lobby had a directory of residents, and I noted his apartment number for future reference. Then I drove to Catherine Sennett's charity office at the Children's Hospital. She was listed as Director of Development, a position that required absolute moral authority and unimpeachable reputation. I walked into the office and asked to speak with her about a potential donation. The receptionist, a young woman with earnest eyes and a hospital volunteer badge, led me to Catherine's office. Catherine Sennett was even more formidable in person. She sat behind a mahogany desk like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence, her blue eyes assessing me with the precision of a surgeon. "Mr. Kellor," she said, glancing at the business card I'd given her assistant, "you're interested in supporting our pediatric cancer program?" "Among other things, I believe in accountability, Mrs. Sennett, personal and professional." Her expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. "That's an admirable philosophy. I think you'd agree that people in positions of trust have special obligations. To their organizations, their families, their communities. Absolutely." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. "I have some information that might interest you. About trust, accountability, and the importance of making good choices." She took the envelope without opening it. "What kind of information?" "The kind that helps people make informed decisions about their futures." I stood up and walked to the door, then turned back. "Your husband has excellent taste in restaurants, by the way. Romano's serves a wonderful tiramisu." Her face went white, but she maintained her composure. 20 years of charity galas and board meetings had taught her to smile while the world collapsed around her. "Thank you for your interest in our program, Mr. Keller. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Sennett. I hope the information proves useful." I left her with the envelope containing detailed records of Troy's expense account, irregularities, restaurant receipts, and hotel charges. Nothing illegal, but plenty that would be difficult to explain to a wife who controlled the family finances. That afternoon, Benny called with an update. "Troy Sennett's having a very bad week," he said. "Word is, his wife's filed for separation, moved out of their house, hired a lawyer, and started asking questions about their joint assets. Sounds expensive. Gets worse. The board's bringing in outside investigators to review his accounts, professional auditors, forensic accountants, the works. If there's anything to find, they'll find it." I felt a surge of satisfaction. The dominoes were falling exactly as I'd planned. "What about the other employees?" "Depends on what the investigation turns up. Anyone who was involved in Troy's questionable activities is probably updating their resumes. Including Evelyn, though she didn't know it yet. That evening, she came home later than usual, looking exhausted and worried. She'd spent the day being interviewed by investigators, answering questions about her working relationship with Troy, her knowledge of his business practices, her involvement in client entertainment. "How did it go?" I asked. "Difficult. They asked about everything, meetings, dinners, travel, expense reports. I told them the truth, but I'm not sure they believed me." "What truth?" She looked at me sharply. "That my relationship with Troy was strictly professional, that I had no knowledge of any policy violations, that I was focused on my own accounts and responsibilities." Each lie came out smoothly, practiced. She'd been rehearsing her story, coordinating with lawyers, preparing for the worst-case scenario. "I'm sure they understand," I said. "I hope so. My career depends on it." But her career was already over. She just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, Catherine Sennett's voice was crisp and controlled. "Mr. Keller, I'd like to meet with you again, to discuss your donation to the hospital." "Of course. When would be convenient?" "This afternoon, but not at my office. Somewhere more private." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown, the kind of neutral territory where wealthy women conducted business they didn't want associated with their public roles. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with an untouched latte and the manila envelope I'd given her. She looked older than she had in her office, as if the information I'd provided had aged her overnight. "Sit down," she said without preamble. I sat across from her, noting the wedding ring she still wore and the careful way she held herself, as if one wrong move might shatter her composure completely. "You're Evelyn Keller's husband," she said. "I am." "And you know about the affair?" "I do." She nodded, opened the envelope, and spread its contents across the table between us. Restaurant receipts, hotel charges, expense reports that documented months of deception. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to gather evidence, not long enough to decide what to do about it." "What do you want?" "Justice, accountability, an end to the lies." She studied me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating, weighing options, assessing risks, planning her next move. "My husband is a fool," she said finally, "but he's my fool, and he's about to lose everything because of his poor judgment. That's his choice." "No, Mr. Keller, that's your choice. You sent those emails, didn't you? Started this investigation?" I didn't deny it. "What happens next depends on what you want to happen next." I leaned forward, meeting her eyes. "I want them to face consequences for their actions, both of them. And then I want to move on with my life." She gathered the papers and put them back in the envelope. "I can help you with that, but I'll need your cooperation." "What kind of cooperation?" "The kind that ensures this situation is resolved quickly and quietly, with minimal damage to innocent parties." "Such as?" "Such as me, and my family's reputation, and the hospital's fundraising efforts." I considered her proposal. Catherine Sennett had resources I couldn't match: money, connections, influence. An alliance with her could guarantee the total destruction of Troy and Evelyn's careers while protecting me from retaliation. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. She smiled for the first time since I'd met her, and it was sharp as broken glass. "Let me show you how powerful people handle problems like this." The Meridian advertising boardroom smelled like expensive coffee and expensive panic. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the parking lot where this had all started, where I'd first watched my wife climb into Troy Sennett's BMW with the casual intimacy of long practice. Now Troy sat at the far end of the conference table, his usual arrogance replaced by the hollow-eyed desperation of a man watching his world collapse in real time. Evelyn sat 3 chairs away from him, the careful distance a futile attempt to avoid guilt by association. Catherine Sennett had arranged this meeting with surgical precision. As the largest individual donor to the Children's Hospital and a board member of 3 local organizations, she had influence that reached into every corner of the community. When she requested a private meeting with Meridian's leadership to discuss reputational concerns, they couldn't refuse. I wasn't supposed to be here. But Catherine had insisted, and Catherine was the kind of woman who got what she wanted. "Before we begin," she said, her voice carrying the authority of old money and older connections, "I want to thank you for accommodating this unusual request." Richard Hartwell, Meridian's CEO, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Of course, Mrs. Sennett, though I'm not entirely clear on the purpose of this meeting." "Clarity," Catherine said, opening a leather portfolio. "I'm here to provide clarity about recent events at your company." She pulled out a stack of documents: financial records, email printouts, expense reports, hotel receipts, the complete archive of Troy and Evelyn's affair, organized with the methodical precision of a prosecutor building a case. These documents detail a systematic pattern of policy violations, misuse of company resources, and breach of fiduciary duty by Mr. Sennett and Mrs. Keller. Troy started to speak, but Catherine cut him off with a look that could freeze helium. The evidence is comprehensive and irrefutable. Hotel charges billed to client accounts, restaurant expenses for personal meetings, travel authorizations for conferences that never existed, company time used for personal activities. She slid copies of the documents across the table to each board member. I watched their faces change as they absorbed the implications, not just the affair itself, but the financial improprieties that made it a legal liability. "Mrs. Sennett," Evelyn said, her voice carefully controlled, "I think there's been a misunderstanding about the nature of my working relationship with Troy." "Has there?" Catherine pulled out her phone and placed it on the table. "Perhaps this will clarify things." She pressed play, and Troy's voice filled the room. "Can't wait for tonight. Same place as always?" Then Evelyn's voice. "I'll bring the wine. You bring those ideas you wanted to explore privately." The recording was devastating, not because it was explicitly inappropriate, but because the intimacy was unmistakable. These weren't colleagues discussing business. These were lovers planning an assignation. "How did you," Troy began, "obtain this recording?" Catherine smiled. "Your wife has been documenting your activities for months, Mr. Sennett. Insurance, you might say, for the divorce proceedings." The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. I watched Evelyn's face cycle through emotions: shock, fear, anger, and finally calculation. She was already planning her next move, looking for an angle that might save her career. "Richard," she said, turning to the CEO, "I want to be clear that while I may have exercised poor judgment in my personal relationships, I've never violated company policy regarding client accounts or expense reporting." Catherine laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. "Really? Shall we review the Henderson account expenses, the Romano's dinners charged to client entertainment, the Riverside Hotel meeting rooms that were never used for business purposes?" She produced another set of documents, these showing a pattern of fraudulent expense reporting that stretched back 6 months. Every dinner, every hotel room, every fabricated business expense that had funded their affair. "This isn't just a personnel issue," Catherine continued. "It's potential fraud, misappropriation of company funds, the kind of behavior that attracts regulatory attention and criminal investigation." The legal implications hit the room like a physical blow. Richard Hartwell's face went pale as he realized the scope of the liability. This wasn't just about firing 2 employees, it was about protecting the company from criminal prosecution. "What do you want?" he asked Catherine. "Resolution. Clean, complete, and immediate." She outlined her terms with the precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. Troy and Evelyn would be terminated for cause, forfeiting all severance and benefits. They would sign comprehensive non-disclosure agreements, preventing them from discussing their employment or the circumstances of their termination. They would repay all misappropriated funds and accept permanent bans from working in the advertising industry. "And if they refuse?" Richard asked. "Then I'll be forced to share this information with the district attorney's office, the state licensing board, and several prominent industry publications." It wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution. Troy tried one last desperate gambit. "Catherine, please, we can work this out privately. The marriage, the money, everything. But destroying my career won't help anyone." She turned to look at him with the cold fury of a woman who'd spent 20 years married to a man she was finally free to destroy. "You're right, Troy. Destroying your career won't help anyone. But it will satisfy me." The meeting ended with signatures on termination documents and non-disclosure agreements. Troy and Evelyn were escorted from the building by security, their corporate access revoked, their professional lives effectively ended. I followed Catherine to the parking lot, where her Mercedes waited like a silver chariot of vengeance. "Thank you," I said. Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning. She handed me a business card for a divorce attorney, one of the most expensive in the state. Margaret Chen specializes in cases involving financial fraud and adultery. She'll ensure you receive everything you're entitled to in the divorce. I don't want everything. I just want out. Mr. Keller, your wife has been stealing from her employer to fund an affair with a married man. She's committed fraud, adultery, and breach of contract. You're entitled to compensation for the damage she's caused to your marriage and your reputation. She was right, but revenge had lost its appeal. I'd wanted justice, accountability, an end to the lies. Now I had all three, and they felt hollow as victory. What happens to them now? Troy will be divorced, unemployed, and unemployable in his chosen field. His reputation in this community is finished. Evelyn will face similar consequences, plus potential criminal charges if the district attorney decides to pursue the fraud allegations. It was everything I'd wanted when this started. Total destruction, complete consequences, justice served with surgical precision. So why did I feel empty? You did the right thing, Catherine said, as if reading my thoughts. They made their choices. You simply ensured they faced the appropriate consequences. I nodded and walked to my car, leaving Catherine to her silver Mercedes and her cold satisfaction. The parking lot was nearly empty now, just a few scattered vehicles belonging to employees who'd stayed late to process the day's drama. My phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. We need to talk. But we didn't need to talk. Everything that mattered had already been said in that boardroom, in those documents, in the careful destruction of 2 careers and 1 marriage. I drove home to the house we'd shared for 15 years, past the basement where I'd planned this campaign, past the kitchen where she'd told me so many careful lies. The silence felt different now, not empty, but clean. Tomorrow I would call Margaret Chen and begin divorce proceedings. I would sell the house, divide the assets, and start building a life that belonged entirely to me. Tonight, I sat in my basement workshop, surrounded by tools and projects, and the honest satisfaction of work completed. They'd called me insecure for questioning their late nights. They'd been right about the insecurity, but wrong about everything else. I wasn't the last honest man in town, but I was the only one who demanded honesty from the people who mattered most. And that, finally, was enough.